I look at it and I start bleeding.
Yeah. I mean, you have to wear heavy gloves because, I mean, I remember once I was doing something and something slipped and my hand raked across it and my knuckles it basically grated down almost to the bone. It's like a cheese grater for human hands.
Welcome to the Fine Home Building Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. I'm joined by Associate Editor Matt Milham.
Hello.
And Rob Wadzak, Digital Brand Manager.
Howdy.
Please email us your questions at fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. So you guys are sitting in different spots. It's making me a little nervous. What exactly is going on?
So you say that most of the people who listen to the show will never know. But
was it an attempt to create anxiety for me?
Yeah, we were trying to tweak your OCD.
Seems like it sure worked. I don't know. I walked in and Matt was like arranging some papers and his computer was sitting where I normally sit.
I'm going to forget who you guys are.
Yeah.
I screwed with him. I was just trying to give him the wonky mic.
And I think your voices sound different too.
Oh yeah, I sound like Rob now.
Yep. Actually, one of the real reasons we did this is because if anybody watches on YouTube or sees the podcast show up on our website, the photo looks the same every time. It's the three of us sitting in the same three. I try to wear a different shirt every week just for that reason, so that they're not like getting 20 copies of the same podcast.
So do you think that people who watch it on YouTube or on our webpage are actually watching the video?
I hope so.
I hope not.
I know. I got a face perfect for radio.
Yeah. It should be
right.
an all audio medium. There should be no video.
So,
Yes.
I want to do something a little different today.
Okay.
All right.
I don't want to talk about projects.
Oh.
Do you know why?
Why?
Because I don't have any to talk about. Pure vanity.
Yeah, what a coincidence. I have nothing to talk about either.
Yeah. Well, I mean, behind the curtain, it's all of 2 days since the last time we last recorded a podcast. So
right.
We haven't really had
But
much
you
time
have
to
been
do
working
stuff.
on your workbench.
Yeah, I got...
Shh, that's a project. You're not allowed to talk about that.
Am I not allowed to talk about that?
Just quickly.
I kind of threw it together a little bit. Like it's held together now just with clamps. And mostly I did this just for anybody who wanted to look to see what it's kind of going to look like.
So why are there holes in the legs?
Those holes that are sort of halfway up the legs, I'm going to put 2x6s in those to hold my table saw at the end of the thing, so I can use it sort of as an outfeed table.
You think that thing will be heavy enough to keep your table saw from tipping?
Yeah. The whole thing's probably going to weigh a little over 200 pounds, so hopefully. The other ones are for stretchers. There's going to be other ones going the short way, too. I just haven't cut those slots yet because I wanted to make sure I had the legs in the right place before.
So how are you going to cut those mortises for the end stretchers?
Jigsaw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You worried about blade deflection there?
A little bit.
I don't have a good answer for you.
Yeah. No, I'll probably just use Jigsaw to finish the cut, and I'll probably do most of it just with a handsaw. That's what I did for all of those
How do you make a close cut with a hand? You have to drill a hole first.
No, well, I'm just going to be going in from the bottom.
I gotcha.
Yeah. Because none of it's glued in. All that is just free. I'm just going to take all those parts out.
I don't know. It kind of looks to me like a good start for a Trojan horse.
Yeah.
Those big beefy legs.
How will you trim the ends of the top?
That is going to be probably a circ saw.
I hope you have a really big one.
Yeah.
the Sasquatch.
Yeah. That's what I should do. Borrow that, get that back from Ben Bogey.
Yeah, he's got it in Maine.
Yeah.
It's not a far drive to Portland.
No.
It's only 4 hours.
Yeah.
I bet he'd let you borrow it. What they're talking about, for those of you who don't know, is a saw with a 16 and 15/16 inch blade. Generically, it's called a beam saw, and this one is made by Skill Saw, and it's patterned after the worm drive saw that they've been making for decades. And it's really what you want to cut 6x.
Yeah, take a look on finehomebuilding.com. There's a nice picture of Patrick standing behind it and looking like a very small person.
Yeah,
it's hilarious.
He looks like a child next to that saw.
It's so big, it's so funny. Makita has one too, but it's not as good. So if you're looking for one of these, buy the Skill Saw by all accounts.
Yeah, but Makita's has been around forever. I think that's what people
and
have
that's
used
unfair.
for a long time.
It's been around. It hasn't had an update. I think I was told since that tool was introduced in the early 80s. So
Yeah. Well, now they've got some competition. Now they got a reason to upgrade.
yeah, exactly.
So now, I mean, the justification for developing a saw like that is it strictly for timber framers, or is it for people working with engineered lumber?
Well, the big, yeah, of course, all those things. But the big plus is you can cut a 6x6 in one pass at 90 degrees. So, and people use those for everything, right?
Yeah.
And plus, who wouldn't want to show off an absolutely enormous circular saw to your friends?
So you used this thing, didn't you?
I did.
What kind of a kick does it have?
It's so freaking heavy, it doesn't have hardly at all. In fact, my Hypoid 7.25-inch Makita kicks way worse. So what you do is you start the motor and then you have to line up the cut in that case. But I didn't find that to be a problem with the skill saw at all.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to do, Matt, is you are probably one of the best traveled people I have ever met. And it's because you both were in the Army and then worked for the Army as a civilian, right?
Yeah. I was a reporter for Stars and Stripes overseas.
And how long did you do that?
On and off for 7 years, I think, at Stripes. And yeah, I was overseas mostly from 2004 until 2015.
And where are all the places you've lived?
I was stationed in Germany for a while. I guess you could say I lived in Afghanistan for about 2.5 years.
Yep.
I was in Kuwait for a year. Yeah, but I've been I got sent a bunch of different places from Germany.
Right.
And
So you traveled a lot in addition to the places you lived overseas.
Yeah. Yep.
How many places would you guess? Dozens?
Yeah, probably at least a couple dozen. I don't know. A lot of the Middle East. I mean, I've been to, Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, the UAE.
And these are all places that, like, most of our listeners probably don't go, right?
Yeah.
So what I wanted to ask you is, like, what is the most interesting or bizarre housing you saw in all the places you've been?
There's such a variety, and even within individual countries, like in Afghanistan, they kind of build with what they have in wherever they are.
Poverty, I'm sure, is driving.
Yeah. It's not like they're getting. There's no home center. There's no Home Depot in Afghanistan. So,
but I mean, does like anyone have indoor plumbing as an example in major cities and stuff? Like, can you go to a hardware store and buy a valve?
I would say in the major cities, I shouldn't say there are no home centers. Probably if you're in Kabul, like I remember driving by almost every day this huge equipment, I don't know if it was a dealer or a rental place, but you could get like a gigantic backhoe or all that kind of stuff, cranes.
Can you get fuel?
You can. There are gas stations in a lot of those places, but yeah, if you're out in the woods, I mean, you have to travel probably 50 miles or more to get gas. Wow. Like, I mean, if you're in Kandahar, if you're outside of Kandahar city, then you probably have to go pretty far to get gas.
And what do these homes look like? You said they're mud bricks?
Yeah, it's a real mix. So, like, if you're in the east, there is some wood. I wouldn't say wood frame. There is like one town, I think, that I know of that had sort of like wooden buildings, but a lot of it was stone. Mm-hmm. And then they would have sort of like a wood framed roof, often with like a mud covering on top of it. But then in the Southwest, yeah, you had sort of like mud brick or just sort of like mud straw piled up, like especially for perimeter walls, because almost every house there has a perimeter wall around it. It's sort of like a house inside of a little compound. Mm-hmm.
Are there sorry to interrupt, but are there builders per se, or does like someone who wants a house has to build it themselves?
I think that it's mostly just, like if you want a house, you build it yourself. And, I think there's probably a lot of family help that gets thrown in on that. But you see, even from town to town in sort of an area, like in a district, in a province, say in Helmand, from one town to the next, you may see like all the houses in one town have like vaulted roofs. And they just look cool. They're like these nice domes. Mm-hmm. And then the next town over, it's all flat roofs, maybe because there's nobody there who knows how to build a domed roof.
And it's probably like here, we're like, oh, that house is cool. I want that kind.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of that too. But you see just so many different things, and it's pretty neat. And then, and then you go to Europe, and it's a completely different thing. I mean,
and Germany is mostly masonry? I mean, they have huge forests, though.
Yeah, but at some point, and I don't know if this was before World War II or after World War II, they stopped really building with like combustible materials. So there's really almost no wood frame construction at all. It's like all block. The
And
roofs
is wood used at all in construction for decorative elements or trim and doors and stuff like that?
Yeah, you see some, especially like if you're in the Alps, you do see like chalets and stuff like that. And so you do see a lot of huge timbers. But then, like the building itself is probably stuccoed block.
Interesting.
Yeah. Always like, these like either concrete tile or clay tile roofs, slate roofs, things like that.
Do you see any like consumptive building materials or like, I don't know, consumptive isn't the right word, like things with a designed lifespan in Europe?
I wouldn't
You know
say,
what I mean?
Yeah, I wouldn't say like here, like, a roof is going to last, you're getting like your 60-year shingles or whatever.
There's an expectation that you're going to have to do this every 20 years or 30 years or 10 years or whatever. But is that mentality present in Germany?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I'm sure that the stucco needs some kind of like, regular attention, but I don't remember seeing guys out there restuccoing houses on a regular basis.
So do you know if housing was more expensive in Germany than here because of that? Longer lasting materials?
I don't know. It's a different mentality when you buy a house, I think, in Germany. A lot of Germans, I think, buy a house that if they're buying a house, it's the house that they're going to live in for the rest of their lives. They're not like building to flip or like buying a house to flip it or buying a house to live in, like a starter home and then plan on moving. They're buying their forever home. Their first home is their forever home. And
why do you think that is?
I don't know. That's just, I think, the way they are. They're thrifty. They're much thriftier. There's much higher savings over there than there is in the U.S. So I don't know. I don't know enough to really say why it is that it's that way. It just is that way. Like the family home is the family home. A home may have been in the hands of a single family for generations, and you just don't see that very often in the U.S. except maybe with like mansions.
Well, one thing I've seen is that just the way you can buy property in a lot of other countries, especially in Europe, is very different than the way you buy here.
How's that, Rob?
They don't have the same sort of
mortgage
infrastructure. A lot of the houses require either a large sum of money put down in cash or even the whole thing purchased in one lump sum.
I can't see why that's a good idea.
Yeah, and I don't know. There just seems to be. I don't really know all the details, but just from being different places around the world, and of course just watching some of those shows where they're like traveling around the world, like
buying houses internationally. So what about in the Middle East? Like, what's the predominant construction method for residential there?
From what I noticed, it was mostly concrete block. And then I think they stucco over that. That was one thing. The first thing I noticed probably when I got off the plane in Kuwait was I couldn't tell if they were building houses or taking them down because they had like the junkiest looking, like it was like a bamboo scaffolding or something like that around all these structures, and the block work just looked so bad.
Really?
And I couldn't tell what was going on there at all. And because I was driving these roads almost every day for a year, I saw them, stucco the outsides, and at the end they look great. They look fantastic. It wasn't my taste exactly. Some of them ended up a little bit sort of gaudy, I guess. But
like how so?
Oh, they would just like ornament everything and kind of like add additional details to kind of make them look like little mansions or something like that. I mean, there's a lot of money there.
Yeah.
So.
And is the work being done by Kuwaitis or
No.
international workers?
No, it's all being done by like out of country people.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Probably indentured labor.
That's a disturbing thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yep.
What was the like most inadequate housing you saw in all of your travels?
The most inadequate housing. Well, I mean, the stuff like in Kabul, I lived in a house that was the electrical infrastructure there is pretty terrible. So you have to have a generator, and there's no real central heat. So like every room has a little, I think they call them a bukhari, which is basically like almost like a barrel that's been modified to operate as a stove.
And you put wood in it?
You put sort of like almost like a plug of sawdust that's been compacted into this thing, and it burns for a couple hours.
And you have to buy that from supplier?
You just go down the street and some guy's selling it out of a stall on the side of the road.
Wow.
Is it kind of like those little bio bricks you see at the supermarket sometimes?
It's more like it's like a round plug, and it has like a hole down the middle, and you light it. And I couldn't even remember exactly. I think it burns from the top down. Gets pretty hot though.
And these homes have windows to keep the heat in?
In Kabul, yeah. But once you get to the outskirts, I mean, it's interesting. I saw some really nice woodwork in some like weird stone houses, and in villages in the middle of nowhere, but they would have no glass in them. And I don't know if they were waiting for glass or if they just sort of that was the way they operated in the summer, and then they plugged up the windows in the winter.
With what?
I don't know. Probably just more rock.
Pink styrofoam.
Stack more rock in there. Old
Man.
Pepsi bottles, maybe.
So we think about building here, and it's easy to get anything, but like in much of the world, you're limited to what you can scrounge and steal.
Well, a couple of years ago, I traveled to Iceland, and most of the buildings there seem to be made out of concrete or stone and metal, because it's an isolated place, and they
Do they have
don't
forests?
have. They don't. They're starting to grow forests again for lumber, but I think basically for hundreds of years they didn't have any lumber source locally. And so what you're starting to see now is that people who have money, partially because of the tourist industry and partially because there's just more trade going on there, are building more European-style houses with wood in them, but most of the architecture isn't. And the funny thing is they don't even have, because it's a volcanic island, they don't have limestone. So they were making concrete from dredged like shells, basically, from the ocean floor.
What's that word again? Pallosan?
Pozzolans?
Yeah, thanks.
I don't know.
Those are things that when you wet them, they turn to cement, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
But
Like fly ash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting because you just drive around and you just don't see the materials that you see here because
What's
they're
roofing
so isolated.
commonly?
I think metal is pretty common there.
Like standing seam or panels?
The older stuff would be standing seam, and the newer stuff would be more panels. Yeah.
Interesting. I've never been anywhere except in Canada, so I've been all over the U.S. Things are pretty similar, except when you get to the Southwest. And
Yeah.
I haven't traveled near as much as Matt has, but there's this game I play on the computer called Geoguessr, which is basically it works over Google Maps' Street View API, and it just drops you places in the world.
And you try and predict where it is.
You can actually move around. You can move around as much as you want, just like you do in Street View. And the one thing I've found consistently is that at different latitudes, in different sides of the globe, that you will see the same environment and a lot of the same types of construction, just because
that's what
makes
works.
sense.
Yeah, and we've gotten away from that, I would say, to an alarming degree in this country, regionally appropriate practices of building. And I think we're all to blame for that. Well, that's fascinating. I hope to revisit this topic again. I got more questions, but we gotta
I
get
should have
moving.
brought in some pictures. I started going through some stuff last night, looking at all these because.
Did you like living in these different places, or was it a burden?
No, it was interesting. It's really, it's just interesting to see the way other people live.
Yeah,
and
totally.
It really makes you appreciate life in the United States for sure.
Oh
in
yeah,
some of these other weird places.
It's easy here compared to most places.
Yeah, so when you would get to a new place, would there be any initial period of being uncomfortable or unsettled? Because
yeah, and some of that would linger all the time because you always had to think about what you were doing, because it wasn't an environment I grew up in. It wasn't like I naturally knew that I wasn't supposed to do a certain thing in a certain place.
Like what?
Like not drink water during Ramadan in front of Muslims.
Yeah, man. That's social faux pas, right?
Yeah. You can't just walk down the street with a bottle of water.
Interesting.
Yeah,
it's really
it's
interesting.
Like hot as heck, but don't want to get in trouble.
Right. Our first question today comes from Jorg from San Antonio. Good afternoon. I'm facing a common problem that has been coming up with other listeners. My home was built in 1979 and is an energy pig. It is a single story, and I would like to air seal the attic before blowing in some cellulose. It currently has a few inches of some blown-in fiberglass insulation, the black stuff that makes your skin itch like the devil. Now, is it worth removing the old insulation and properly air sealing with acoustical sealant and spray foam, or will I get similar results by just blowing in a mile of cellulose? Who's first?
I don't think you're going to get the same performance by blowing in a mile of cellulose. I mean, it may block some air, but it's not an air seal on its own. So I would say that, yeah, you probably got to take all this old insulation out if what you really want to do is air seal that.
Yeah, the building science folks, I mean, who have done testing on air sealing, whether it be Building Science Corporation or any of the people that we see on Green Building Advisor, that's just sort of like, they're like, yeah, this is what you got to do. You got to go in there and start with a clean surface, get your can of foam or caulk out, and do blocking, whatever it is, identify all those holes, because the cellulose is a better air retarder than, let's say, like fiberglass bats, but it does not stop at all.
No.
So this comes up a lot, obviously, and I was trying to think of a way to explain this to a friend recently who was converting his garage into a wood shop. And I explained it this way. I was like, if you want to keep warm air in a balloon, right, does it make sense to tie the balloon, or does it make sense to wrap the open balloon with fluffy stuff? So, I think that answer is pretty self-evident. You need to first seal the balloon before you can keep the warm air in it, right? So do that first.
Well, and the one thing that people don't really think about probably is, there's a lot of forces of nature going on here. When you're standing in a room that's next to another room that's the same temperature, you're not going to see much change in movement of air. Because because the air will move more quickly if there's a bigger temperature differential. So if you're in a cold climate and your house is nice and toasty warm, it's like faster than a bath fan that's pumping through all those cracks in your house.
And similarly, importantly, that's bad language. I'm sorry.
You're an editor?
Of equal importance is in a cooling climate, your attic is freaking blazing hot. So you got to stop that air and put some insulation in. So it works both ways.
Yeah.
I mean, heat wants to move from more to less.
Mm-hmm.
Always. That's what it's trying to do. It's trying to equalize.
I mean, if you don't have a blower door or you don't have a smoke stick to walk around on a day when there's a big temperature difference between one side of the ceiling or wall and the other, I find like the two cheap ways to do this are, if you've got bad insulation, like you said, this stuff is black. I mean, it's black from all the dirt flying through there at high speeds, or spider webs. If you see spider webs around an opening, a light fixture, that's a good sign that there's air moving through there, because the spiders, just for some reason, I guess they catch more bugs if there's air movement. So.
Yeah.
I'd suggest a third method.
Yeah.
A good cigar.
Really? Okay. There you go.
Go up in the attic with a good cigar, look for the smoke to move around. So where are we going to look for these holes in the ceiling air boundary? Along walls, right? You'll see the top plates underneath the insulation. That is a prime leaky spot for air movement. Any pipes or wires, other penetrations you're going to want to seal around. I found an absolutely huge hole connecting my basement to my roof, which was enough to have a thick layer of mold start growing in the wintertime, because that warm, moisture-laden air from inside the house was hitting the roof sheathing, which was outside temperature and condensing, right? Because it was the coldest thing. So I had to fix that.
Man.
And some of the holes are really big.
So have either of you guys actually seen anybody who's had a house with the bath fan pumping directly into the attic before?
Like me.
Really?
When I bought it.
But I mean, have you seen any evidence of like what that can do, or do you have a leaky enough house that it?
No, because they had disconnected the vent pipe, the duct, and it was just hanging there. And then they covered the whole thing in insulation. So
The
it was
fan itself?
Yeah.
So it was just blowing into the insulation?
It was just blowing into the insulation. And as a result, the drywall around the fan completely deteriorated. And they had tried to cover that up. They had used like layers and layers of mesh tape and drywall compound. I don't know how many times they had gone back to try to fix it.
Why does this thing keep leaking? I keep putting mud on it.
I don't know. But then I was like, what is going on here? When I noticed it, and I went up into the attic, and I was like, all right, this thing's not connected. I excavated the fan, and the drywall was completely crumbling. Like I touched it, and it just disintegrated. I was like, all right, well, I guess I got to replace the drywall on the ceiling.
You know, it's,
So in San Antonio, that's less of a worry, but your air-conditioned air is, you want to keep that in the house, right?
Yeah.
And you don't want the hot attic air to come into the living space. And you can have condensing surfaces inside the living space in a cooling climate, right? So those air leaks from the attic are going to make their way into the house and then condense on your ductwork or on registers, and you'll get these problems. So
Yeah.
yeah. So even more from just a heating perspective, just a durability perspective, it's an important thing to do.
totally. So do that right away. Next, we have an email from Chris from Connecticut. Hi, guys. 5 years ago, we moved into our current house in Connecticut, a Cape, and I added 8 can lights with LED retrofit screw-in bulbs in the living room via access through the second-story floor, which I cut open. By this point, I had read all about the convoluted ways to try and safely air seal can lights, and I promptly disregarded them in favor of caulking the trim kit to the ceiling drywall. So as far as I can tell, with a smoke stick, they are airtight, and I needn't worry about these bulbs dying for a little while yet. So why the hell isn't everyone else doing this?
Because I don't think that's what people are concerned about necessarily.
Yeah, I think
Like,
there's
this is
two
between
things at
two
work
floors.
here. Yeah,
Yeah. This isn't a roof or like,
it's in between it's inside the thermal boundary.
Yeah.
Right. Assuming that the joists are blocked off underneath the Cape's knee walls, right? That second floor is inside the house. So you're not going to have those air leakage problems that you would if you had these in an attic or in a ceiling of a one-story home.
right.
And the problem is often the housings, which if you caulk the trim kit, yeah, that's helpful if you have an airtight housing. But if you have an open housing, a vented housing, that's not going to help because the air is just going to go around the bulb.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Through the can itself.
Yes.
but what Chris did was help stop sound transmission, right? Because if you can stop the air path but from the upstairs to the down, you're also going to stop the movement of sound. So it wasn't a complete waste of time, but
Yeah.
worry more about the can lights in your second story or your first or your single story ceiling.
Yeah.
Is there anything else to say about this?
Not really. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is, it really depends on the type of can you have because there's the IC can, there's airtight cans. You know, some cans are just full of holes.
Right.
And if you weren't using LED lights, if you were using some hot halogen or old incandescent bulbs, which more and more we're not seeing that as much anymore.
Right.
But you did have to worry about how you covered up or air sealed cans in the past because of the heat would actually trip a heat switch inside the can.
Or start a fire.
Yeah.
Even worse. So we have an article done by Larry Armando. We'll put that up on the podcast page that describes how to safely seal can lights. And, the other concern, Larry was in weatherization work for many years, and what they would see is people would swap the correct bulb in their can lights for something like Rob suggested, a halogen, or what's even worse is a conventional Edison-style bulb. And these things make cans get way hot enough to melt the insulation on wiring, which is what Larry discovered with a test chamber. So if you're into nerdy science stuff, boy, this article is for you. I had a blast working on that one.
Yeah, I actually had that happen on one of my bathroom lights. The bulb went out, and I went in and looked, and it was a halogen bulb that came with it. This was years ago, and it had totally cooked the insulation off of the wire that I had to break open the can light and basically rewire it.
Yeah, it's a real danger.
Was that the newer style Romex or was it the old
It wasn't even the Romex. It was like a plastic sheathed wire that came with the light itself.
It was inside the can.
Yeah, inside the can itself.
Man.
What Matt is alluding to is there's a newer and older version of non-metallic sheathed cable, commonly called Romex, and one is better at resisting heat than the other. The NFB is more heat resistant.
Yep.
Good question, though. Ceiling can lights. I have 2 of those. I have a set of 4 LED retrofit in my can lights, and I find they stink. They turn on and off, and it's not thermally controlled, obviously. It's just like they're not working reliably.
Like something in
they're
the circuitry.
Faulty. Yeah.
I mentioned a week or so ago that I put those slimline LED in my house, and I've got them hooked up now. They're nice. And they got this really neat
You should briefly
feature.
tell folks what those are about if you don't.
Yeah, so when you buy a can light, a recessed light in your ceiling, you usually have to buy a separate trim piece that's the bezel, the visible portion, and then the cover for the bulb or diffuser. This looks like just that part. It just is like a white disc with a frosted glass or plastic disc in the middle, and the LEDs are so much better now that even though the thing is only a half an inch thick, it diffuses the light nicely, and you don't see those little pinpoints that you used to see on the LEDs when you'd get because most LEDs have lots of little tiny diodes in them that each emit light, and the farther away from like a diffuser or a lens they are, the more
You see the points, yeah.
Yeah, and so
So the advantage to these fixtures you put in is that you don't need that penetration in the ceiling, right?
yeah, I mean, I went up into the attic and put them in that way, but if I had gone with the 6-inch ones, the little electric box that comes with the light that you hook everything up with, and that has, I guess, a transformer or some sort of circuitry in it, would have been smaller than the hole that I needed to drill in the hole in the ceiling to put the light in, and you could have done the whole job from below. I probably could have done the whole job even with the 4-inch ones that I put in from below. And so in really tight spaces, I mean, you could fit these things in like an 1.5 inch space.
And it's good for anywhere new, right? Because you're solving that leaky can problem that is so prevalent.
Yeah, and it's like those cans are as big as they are because they needed the air space and just the space for the bulbs themselves from the old style light bulbs.
Good tips. Our next question is from Joey from Boston. I have a question I think is about air sealing and insulation. Our first floor laundry bathroom gets very cold in the winter despite the adjacent sunroom, which shares the forced hot water heating zone, and that room is very comfortable. The 11 by 12 bathroom was added in the 50s, and because of its location, it is exposed on 3 sides and has a flat roof above. I also think it's the end of this particular heating loop. Below the bathroom and sunroom is a crawl space. There's an opening from the full-height basement, but this is full of AC ductwork, so the remaining access is from an exterior window. There's a unit heat under there with its own thermostat, presumably to avoid freezing pipes. There is some insulation between the floor joists, but only in under about half the floor area. Last winter, I spray foamed some obvious gaps around the foundation and weather stripped around the window. I'm not sure what the best, most efficient approach is. To isolate the living room from the crawl space by insulating and air sealing the floor better and letting the unit heater minimally warm the pipes below, or insulate the foundation walls, maybe with spray foam, and just treat the entire space as conditioned. Should I remove the insulation bats in this case, and how high should I set the crawl space thermostat? Maybe you have another option. Photos are attached. Please let me know if I can clarify. And thanks for all the great content. Oh, you're welcome, Joey. Thank you for the question.
First question.
Joey's question.
Is that a gas heater?
It is.
Yeah. So I think you definitely need probably to seal off the crawl space from the living space.
No, that's not a gas heater. I'm sorry. That's a unit heater. That's hot water.
Oh, okay.
So
I was
it's
like, what is going on there? Yeah, I couldn't tell if that was water coming in.
It's
it
like,
looked like a gas shutoff on that bottom one, but
it's probably water.
Yeah. Okay.
So think of that like a toe space heater, except it hangs from a ceiling, and you see these kind of things in garages and like utility spaces, right? It circulates hot water through it. It's got an electric fan that comes on and off based on a thermostat.
Yep.
Okay.
So basically, he's got a crawl space that looks like he's got some sort of vapor barrier of some sort
There's poly on the floor
and
the ground.
Shallow space, brick walls. But the fact that he's got all of that plumbing and ductwork down there would and clean, smooth walls would make me think you'd want to
do the
walls,
insulate the walls.
Yeah,
yeah, totally.
Plus, he also mentioned that he's got like one of the big no-nos there is the bat insulation in a crawl space on the, between the floor above and the space down below. I mean,
It could be pretty yucky up there, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just never really a great idea to have anything below your main floor of your house that's fibrous insulation.
And why is that?
Because
you need an air barrier for one.
Well, yeah, and I mean, if you've ever pulled any of that stuff down in an old house, I mean, you
it's always wet up there.
It's wet. It's full of mice. And,
it's horrible.
It's just.
It's going to be fun to work in that crawl space, Joey. I guarantee.
Yeah, but like I said, he's got a brick wall on one side, a concrete wall,
looks like a block, right?
wall on another side, and it looks like the walls themselves are pretty smooth, clean spaces to work on. I mean, but
I'm going to suggest that if he does a good job insulating and air sealing the walls, including the band joist, that the unit heater could be virtually turned off, right? Because that room should stay close to the basement temperature if it's properly air sealed and insulated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That big hole, is that what goes
that
to
connects
the basement?
connects it to the basement.
I was wondering because I saw he spray foamed around the underneath that gigantic hole, and I didn't really know what the purpose
I think that's
of that
to
was.
hold the polyethylene to the walls.
Okay.
I think that's
That
the
makes more
way
sense then.
to glue that there.
Yeah.
I also see a very saggy flex duct, which is problematic for airflow. I mean, if you can pull that tighter, and you'll get better heat out of it, or air conditioning, or whatever that thing is doing. Most importantly, is to pull the inside tight, so it doesn't have any sags, or the springs actually that form that ductwork will slow the air down significantly if it's not pulled real tight.
Yep. But yeah, I mean, definitely address the band joist.
Also, I think we mentioned this in the last podcast, is Dow Thermax is the only insulation we know of that you can leave exposed without an ignition barrier. So that would make that job easier, not having to cover the insulation then with drywall.
Yeah,
or
because he was
plywood or something.
Yeah, because he was asking about spray foam, but I mean, just in general, for a space like that that's accessible, that you're not trying to get between dozens of joists or anything like that, it just seems like rigid foam is just the easiest way to go.
And how should we tell him to fasten it to the masonry?
So a lot of people seem to like those. What's the name of those plastic clips?
Windlock is the company I know of.
Yeah, I mean, you can go with like the Tapcons or other types of, or nail or like nail driven ramset fasteners.
I've had very little luck with those, especially in brick. They work a little better in block, but I don't know. I would do something other than the powder actuated. I just haven't had any success.
Yeah, I mean, that's it just from a couple of the articles I've seen in Green Building Advisor of people documenting projects of their own, the plastic clips. They're basically like a barbed plastic
with a big washer on it.
Cap. Yeah.
And has a washer on it that prevents it from pulling through the foam. You can also sometimes nail the top to the mud sill, right, with a cap nail, and that way you don't have to mess around with some weird fastener.
Yeah. Are there adhesives that are compatible
with foil-faced foam?
I mean, the foil shouldn't react with anything, right?
I don't
put
know.
some PL on there.
I just don't know if it would stick.
I don't know either.
We should look into that though, because I'm sure there's plenty of information on some of our favorite websites about that.
Can I trust you to write that down? Mm-hmm. All right. Is he writing it down, Matt?
He's writing it down.
Okay. This question is from Clifton from Portland, Oregon. Hi, guys. I've been slowly renovating my 1916 bungalow in Portland, Oregon, and recently discovered your podcast. I wish I had a couple years ago. How much great information is available for fine home building? My question is, the next project on my list is to clean up the basement and make it a little nicer for my workshop and utility room. I have a foundation wall that is about 4 feet high around the whole perimeter, topped with a pony wall. Pony wall is a short stud wall, for those of you who are listening. At one point, someone tried to parge coat on the old foundation, but in spots it is bubbling off from what I can only assume is where moisture is coming through. In researching further, I read that parging a cement wall that is mostly lime with a mix of mostly Portland cement will cause this, as moisture and minerals being pulled through the concrete will be blocked by the Portland in the mix and cause it to bubble and crumble. I tested a little bit of the original foundation with some vinegar and indeed got lots of bubbles indicating a high lime content. I'd like to reparge the walls to clean everything up as well as protect the original foundation, since it is on the softer side due to the unwashed sand which was common at the time. I've read that using hydraulic lime mixture is the way to go so I have a couple of questions. Would I need to somehow remove all the bad Portland parge or just in spots where it is bubbling off? Does this sound like the direction to be headed, or is there some other way to address the issue? As I can't afford any major foundation work at the moment. Who can?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask our resident lime expert for his thoughts on this.
I think if you're just going to try to parge right over that wall again,
It's not going to work, right?
it's not going to work.
Because the Portland's going to just pop off.
Yeah, it will just continue to pop
Peel,
off
yeah.
underneath that. I think if you wanted to go over without taking all that off, you could probably use Tapcons or some masonry nails and nail on some expanded metal lath, and then go over that. Parge that. Yeah.
So we should probably explain parging, which is basically skimming mortar on top of I've never seen it done on brick, although I'm sure it can be, but mostly stone masonry, right? Like old field stone or stone foundations, commonly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the thing is, soft brick and old limestone-based materials, or like my basement is just actual limestone. It's so they would have used, like he pointed out, a lime-based stucco or parge coat on there, and part of that is that it's a chemical reaction happening, and you're basically getting that bond between the old and the new material. And in fact, in a lot of places, you were talking about this in Europe, Matt, is it's just expected that that's a sacrificial layer.
Yeah.
Because if there's any moisture moving through that wall, that's where you're going to get it to pop off and degrade over time. If you had a perfectly dry wall, that would never happen. But
That's never going to happen.
it's amazing how much pressure that the hydrostatic pressure that moisture inside porous stone can cause, like thousands of psi. So it's basically like you've got a hammer that stuff
is
off.
lime mortar more moisture permeable than cement-based mortars? Like, part of the problem is the Portland is not allowing that vapor transmission, right?
Yeah.
And that vapor pressure you're talking about is physically pushing off the Portland coating.
Yes.
Yeah, and lime is much more vapor open. I think it's something like 13 perms or something like that.
So that'd be
it's-
a better solution,
Yeah.
for sure, for this situation.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that when I was working for Habitat, fieldstone foundations were common in the rehabs we were doing, and this was almost always part of the equation. And you have to get the right mortar.
Yeah, it's actually really dangerous too for the longevity of anything that has mortar between stones or bricks to use a Portland cemented in
Soft
over
brick
wall.
and stone, it'll destroy them.
It acts like a chisel and just chisels the faces right off of the stones.
You can see this condition called spalling as like the bricks physically blow apart or stone,
Yeah.
and it's bad. Mm-hmm. It's from that harder Portland cement crushing the stuff in changes of temperature.
Yeah, with a lot of masonry, you have to expect a certain amount of maintenance, and you're going to have to repoint that stuff, and so that's why they use a softer mortar to hold those things together. So that's the part that fails, because you're going to need to do that, because if the rocks themselves or the bricks fail, then you have to pull that entire thing out or rebuild the wall.
Yeah. Do you guys know when Portland cement kind of took over the masonry world?
Not until really like the early 1900s. I mean, I think it was invented in like the late 1800s, and then
And even into the 30s and 40s in this in residential construction, lime-based mortars were a commonplace.
Yeah. I think Stickley was one of the first that was sort of like a big proponent for
Portland,
like Portland-based foundations. Yeah.
There's a lot to like about lime, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so as far as getting it off of there, though,
That's not going to be hard.
I mean, how much square? I don't know how much square footage he has, but you could probably just use a long, pry bar and just pop that stuff off of there. But maybe even go as far as getting an air chisel and just at a shallow angle popping that stuff off. I imagine anywhere that the foundation stays relatively dry is where it's sticking better than in other places. So
I think that's probably true.
So it's kind of like the same sort of standards you probably would do with old paint. It's like get the really loose stuff off, and the stuff that's sticking really well, you
Leave
might
it
not
alone.
leave it alone.
Yeah.
And certainly the expanded metal lath is more complicating, but my guess is that would be a longer lasting solution because you have a better mechanical bond between the parge coat and the existing masonry.
Yeah.
Do they have like synthetic alternatives to that now?
I'm sure they do. I've never worked with it. But yeah, if you can avoid using what we used to call blood lath, because you will cut yourself up whether
I look at it and I start bleeding.
Yeah. I mean, you have to wear heavy gloves because, I mean, I remember once I was doing something and something slipped and my hand raked across it and my knuckles were basically grated down almost to the bone. It's like a cheese grater for human hands.
And depending on how
and how
long...
do you cut it? With aviation snips?
Yeah, aviation snips. We cut it with a circ saw. You can cut it with all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, before it's encased in concrete or plaster, it's pretty easy stuff to deal with. But once it's in some set layer of masonry...
I don't know what you're talking about. Like Matt says, it'll like open your arteries.
Well, yeah. But what I mean is, like, if you've ever tried to pull this out, like, depending on how long he plans to be in this house, if he ever thinks he's going to have to deal with that stuff later on, I would say no way, because it's just like it comes off in little bitty pieces when you try to yank it off later.
I love tearing into a bathroom remodel and finding that stuff behind the tile. That is the best.
Yeah.
Yep. That just adds dollars. What do you got to add?
Nada.
I don't know. I'd say, I think we, to summarize, basically get all the loose stuff off as best you can, and wouldn't go crazy with worrying about the stuff that's well adhered, and do some sort of a lime-based plaster.
Yeah.
You had a little difficulty finding lime plaster, or you just needed lime.
Well, and I was looking for hydrated lime, not hydraulic lime. So I don't know how easy or hard it will be for him to find hydraulic lime, but I imagine probably not much different.
And I can't remember what type it is, but maybe it's type S or O. Anyway, we'll put that up on the podcast page too. What a pre-mixed mortar formula letter designation is for lime-based, right? Because there is such a thing.
Yeah, it's like...
And it's much harder to find than the Portland cement-based products.
Mm-hmm.
There are a few places, because I've obviously done a lot of research, having my limestone foundation for years and years.
Have you done this?
I haven't done any of the work yet, and no. I bought a bag of lime like 10 years ago. I just don't like, in the winter, it's too dry and cold down there, and then in the summer, I can't even breathe when I go to my basement. So basically, I have to try to find that like 1 week in either the fall or the spring when it's okay for me to go
down there. I'm sorry to interrupt you. You were saying that...
there are a few places in the country that are suppliers of typical masonry products that actually specifically sell the lime that's ideal for making lime plaster or lime mortar, and I'll try to track those down.
Cool.
And see if I can put it in the notes.
All good questions this time, folks. Thank you for that. And all of you, please send in your questions. That helps make a better show and helps us help more people. I think that's the end of the show today. Thanks to Matt and Rob for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Remember to send us your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. What's up, Rob?
I'm pretty sure that we're just about, when this podcast is going live, leading up to the International Builders Show, which is February 19th to the 21st in Las Vegas.
I'm glad you remembered. Thank you.
And head over to our website, because anybody who's going to be in the area and wants to just go to the floor show where you can check out all the cool stuff.
Or even if you just want to come to Vegas and go to the Builder Show.
Yeah, come say hi to us at our booth.
Yeah.
And watch some of our podcasts being taped live at the show.
We're taping how many, Rob?
6 at the show, yeah. It's going to be a busy week. But anyway, so you can head over to our website to get some information on attending the show, but also to find out how to follow our live coverage of the show while we'll be there.
We go so you don't have to. I love it, though.
It's going to be fun.
You like Vegas?
Never been.
You've never been to Las Vegas?
No, I'm
have you been to
looking
Las
forward to it.
Vegas?
I have.
Do you
a bunch
like
of
it?
times. I wouldn't say I like it, but I don't dislike it.
I like that there is a Las Vegas,
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to live there, but I think it's awesome.
Yeah, it's fine for 2 days, 3 days, maybe 4.
The weather would kill me in the summertime.
Yeah.
I was there in August for a trade show, and it's easily the hottest I've ever been. It's like 120.
Thanks.
Wow.
It was brutal. Thank you all for listening, and please like, comment, or review us wherever you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Thank you again. Happy building.